Okay, well, if you have your syllabus, we're going to be right at the very bottom of page 39. And we'll be looking a little bit more at verse 5. We studied some of that last week, where it says, "And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, and with all thy soul, with all thy might." So there's no room to love ourselves first, or to take too good of care of ourselves, because we have to do what He leads us to do, like the song we just sang. In the first manuscript release, page 207 and 8, it says, "Many of the physicians who today claim to believe the present truth are represented to me as being in no better a spiritual condition than were the priests and rulers in the time of Christ. For their religion is like India rubber, capable of being stretched to suit their circumstances at different times and on different occasions. Exorbitant prices were exacted from those who desired beasts for sacrifice at the temple, but Jesus rebuked this unholy traffic. Divinity flashed through humanity as He went into the temple of God and overthrew the tables of the money changers." Now here comes the shocking statement. Well, maybe not to those of us who have to pay out of our own pocket, it's not shocking. It says, "The same words are applicable to many practicing physicians who are called Christians." So you get the picture? The priests knew that they wouldn't go home without a sacrifice. So they bought animals, they had them on hand, and they put the price way up because they knew the people would have to buy it. They didn't feel right with God if they didn't buy the animal. And so, even though maybe they had to go without food to buy the animal, they would buy it. And the priest could pocket the profit. And so it says that's the same thing that the physicians are doing, some of them, And even though they call themselves Christian, if Jesus were to come to their office, He would have that scourge and He would drive them out. Because He wants the healing ministry to be as easy to have as the spiritual ministry. When you think about it, which is more important, our body or our soul? The soul. So how come ministers don't get away with charging exorbitant fees to help people's soul? But you see, there's a text in the Bible that says, "All that a man hath will he give for his skin." So people won't pay because they're sick spiritually, but they will pay if they're sick physically, because they are determined to get well. And so that's taken advantage of. And actually, to some extent we have to have compassion, because there's a whole system that forces them to charge you more. And so the whole system would have to be abolished. It's a huge situation today. And I'm sure some would like to do better than what they're doing, but they don't know how to beat the system, so they keep on doing it. One example is, more people will see a doctor who drives a Cadillac or a fancy car of some kind than they will if he drives a VW or something, looked upon as not a very valuable car. And the psychology of it is, Well, he must be good. He can afford to drive that kind of car. So there's a lot of things to it, but nonetheless, this is the way God looks at it. First manuscript release, page 211. A multitude of sins has been covered under the profession of medicine, although there has been a witness to every unholy transaction, a just verdict rendered in the decision of every case. Many things that are thought lawful and right in this profession are unlawful, and they need the scourge of small cords in the hand of Christ that they may be driven out. Many good and merciful acts have been done by practicing physicians, but I was shown that as a general thing, the medical profession has become a den of thieves. That's pretty strong language. But, yes.
She also struggled with the way that they were asking for higher wages at the sanitarium.
Yes. Yes. Instead of always wanting higher wages, what we've learned in the work we've done is that you can learn to live on less. If you set your mind to it, if you try to figure out, how can I cut back on this and this and this? We found out we could cut back on a lot of things. When we had quite a bit of money coming in, we were learning wasteful habits, But when the money got small, then we had to learn how to save. And I remember when we came back to Wildwood after pioneering for quite a few years where there was very, very little money. Even what Wildwood pays, which most people think is very little, we said to each other, what are we going to do with all this money? Because we weren't used to having that much. Patriarchs and Prophets, 373. The Savior typified in the rites and ceremonies of the Jewish law is the very same that is revealed in the gospel. In fact, the sanctuary service reveals a lot of details about the gospel that even Romans or Galatians doesn't give us. And so that's why the sanctuary message is so important to us. The clouds that enveloped his divine form have rolled back. The mists and shades have disappeared. And Jesus, the world's Redeemer, stands revealed. He who proclaimed the law from Sinai and delivered to Moses the precepts of the ritual law is the same that spoke the Sermon on the Mount. The great principles of love to God, which he set forth as the foundation of the law and the prophets, are only a reiteration of what he had spoken through Moses to the Hebrew people. And then it quotes Deuteronomy 6, 4 and 5. So, to apply it to this verse, if we love God with all our heart, we will love his children. And we will not overcharge his children for our services. And we will even be willing, if somebody's really poor, to do it for free. If we can afford. There's a limit to how much we can do. But if we love God with all of our hearts and with all our mind and all of our soul, then we care about our brothers and sisters and even other people that are not Seventh-day Adventists. We care about them, and therefore, if we run a business, we arrange our prices according to that. And we make provision for the poor. God always, in the Old Testament, always made some provision for the poor. Okay, now we'll go to verse 6. Deuteronomy 6, verse 6. And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart. Now here's another one of those verses that shows that God never promoted legalism. He never did. He wasn't talking about an outward obedience of the Ten Commandments. He said, I really want you to keep the commandments from your heart. Well, how does that happen? The New Testament tells us, it says God will write his law on our heart so that we want to do what the law says. It's pleasant to us. It's enjoyable to us. And so, when the law is written in our heart, that's the way it can be. And then verse 7, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. Now it's interesting when the education of our children is to take place. And these are often times that we overlook and don't use them. First of all, it says you need to teach them diligently. Then, first one it mentions is when we sit in our house. There are several times that we sit in our house. At mealtime, we sit there. Often, the discussion at mealtime isn't really very valuable. A lot of chit-chat. So, it could be a time when we talk about something important and pass on the knowledge of certain things to the children. Another time we sit down is worship time. And of course that is an important time to teach them as well. Then it says, when you walk by the way. Now in the Israelite system, they had to all go down to Jerusalem 3 times a year. So some of them lived quite a ways away, and it might take them a week of walking to get there, or maybe even longer. And so as they were traveling, God had arranged it where certain monuments were raised up. And as they passed by that monument, they were to tell the story to their children so that they would be familiar with what God did at that place. And then, of course, maybe even when they walked out to the field to work for the day, that some little thought was passed on to the children. But whenever they were walking or traveling, that's when they could be educated. Then, when they went to bed. Now, my mother told me this about my childhood. She said, if you had done wrong during the day, the best time to talk to you about it was just before you went to bed. Now, I don't know whether she didn't tell me that till our children were already raised. But I got to wondering, I wonder if that is a key moment just before children go to bed, when we can talk to them and try to help them see some of God's ways in contrast with what they've done. We're in Deuteronomy 6, verse 7 right now. And the last one listed in verse 7 is, when thou risest up. This probably has to do with morning worship. We always should have morning worship before breakfast. So, as soon as we get going for the day, we get together and we have worship, and we pass on to our children a knowledge of God's law, and a knowledge, in their case, a knowledge of all the laws that He had given them, so that the children could practice those things. Now let's look at a few thoughts that expand what this text means. In Fifth Testimonies, page 328, it says, the Bible gives explicit directions concerning the important work of educating children. The parents are themselves to be connected with God. Okay, so if we're not connected with God, if we don't have a heart relationship with Him, that hinders our educational program. So that's where it begins. They are to have His fear before them. Now, many parents today would rather not do what God said. So if they don't like what God said and they don't want to do it, how can they teach their children? Even if they passed it on to their children, they'd be like the man that's smoking telling his child not to smoke. How effective is that going to be? So, our own habits have to be brought in harmony with the law, but not just a legalistic obedience, but a love of obeying, so that we actually become a salesman for people. As I was talking at that funeral, I decided that's probably the only chance I could ever talk to those people today. That never in my lifetime would I have another chance. And I knew a lot of them were probably not Christian, or probably not heart-related Christians. So I came on fairly boldly and I said, this sudden death that occurred, we don't know. And I said, when you die, after that, your future is set. You can't change after that. So if you don't want to be destroyed in the end, you need to accept Jesus and follow Jesus now, while you have time. And I said, His coming is not very far off, so you need to accept Him soon. And some of them looked kind of serious, but there were some Christians in there, and some even said amen. So, so we have to have His fear before them, and to have a knowledge of His will. So when that happens, then we can try to inspire people with obedience. Whatever it is, it's a blessing. That's what I've found. Every time I obey, I'm blessed. And now we can convince our children and others that this is a blessing. Well, after that's in place, it says, then comes their work. And then it quotes Deuteronomy 6, 7-9. Another one from Fundamentals 141. Satan is ready to do his work. He will not neglect to present allurements which the children have no will or moral power to resist. Now, our children were raised in a different age. But, as you know, we have been called to raise grandchildren. Wow, is it harder now? And the two instruments that really make it hard are cell phone and computer. And there's probably nothing where these words apply more. He will not neglect, talking about Satan, to present allurements which the children have no will or moral power to resist. Once they get on that cell phone and that computer, you're in big trouble. But I'm not totally sure how to avoid it. We have one couple at Wildwood that they've been able to keep their children off from the cell phone till they're, I guess, about 19, 18. The younger one is younger, maybe 16 and 19. And I sure wish we had done that with our grandchildren, but that's not an easy task either. I saw that through his temptations, he is instituting ever-changing fashions. Now that's still being done, but it's certainly not the biggest pull today to want to dress in the style of what other young people are dressing in, and attractive parties and amusements. So people want to put on parties and have them do things that are not beneficial, that mothers may be led to devote their time to frivolous matters instead of to the education and training of their children. In other words, they've got to fix clothes for their children to attend these parties, and they don't have time to teach their children how to love the Lord. Our youth need mothers who will teach them from the cradle to control passion, to deny appetite, and to overcome selfishness. One of the big mistakes that parents make, and of course, most of us here don't have children right now, but the first 3 years is the most important period. And most parents figure, well, when they get older, I'll train them right. But by the time they're 3, they're getting pretty set already. And by 7, they're really getting set. Yes.
She also underlined that by saying, of that first 3 years, the first year is the most important of all.
Okay.
She said that.
Yeah, so we need to deal with passion even in the first year. We need to deal with denying appetite. I remember after I forget which child it was, probably was the second one. After a fairly decent amount of time, he still wanted to be fed at night. And I told my wife, I said, just let him cry. So we let him cry. And he cried a little first night, some more the second night, but it wasn't too long till he learned he wasn't going to get fed at night. So, they can be trained to control passion, to deny appetite, and to overcome selfishness. But we have to start early. Adventist Home 231, woman should fill the position which God originally designed for her as her husband's equal. Now, here's one of the big issues today. Society has convinced women that they're not equal to the man unless they work outside the home. But that's not what this is saying. She is her husband's equal when she raises the children. Now, there was a pastor in this conference. Most of the pastors' wives work, even if they have children. But there was this one pastor, they had been in self-supporting work, but he had gone into the pastoral work. He's retired now, but she never worked while the children were at home. And some people would ask her, how do you live on one salary? Well, they learned how to cut corners. She cut the hair of the boys instead of paying to have it cut. And, on and on. She did a lot of things because to them, It was important for her to be with the children. And I don't know the outcome of their children fully, but I think they're pretty good children, missionaries and other things. They have a wonderful testimony because they valued just what this is talking about. The world needs mothers who are mothers not merely in name, but in every sense of the word. We may safely say that the distinctive duties of women are more sacred. See how important it is? The mother's duties are more sacred than the man's, more holy than those of man. So the church needs to be a place where we make that known, so that the mothers who want to be fully addressing their raising of their children, that they can be encouraged, because society keeps telling them the opposite. Let woman realize the sacredness of her work, and in the strength and fear of God, take up her life mission. Let her educate her children for usefulness in this world and for a home in the better world. Now, when you think of a mother in the Bible that did that, what mother do you think about? Hannah? Okay. Yeah, Hannah only had Samuel for 3 years, and he wasn't going to a good home when he left, was he? And yet, what a testimony he was. Okay, Jochebed. Yeah. Wow, what a privilege she had to raise a Moses. Isn't that something? And there were other mothers. Did you mention one? Oh, you mentioned Jochebed. Okay.
Rebecca?
Okay, Rebecca. She made some mistakes, but still, one of them turned out good. Who? Eve. Yeah, I think generally she must have done a good job, because Abel was certainly a godly man, and Seth was. Cain wasn't, but, even the best of parents can lose a child to the enemy. Yeah, Mary's a good example, raising Jesus. Now here's another one from Counsels on Education, page 178. The position of a woman in her family is more sacred than that of the king upon his throne. Wow. If we really believe that, which one would most women rather be? A king or a mother at home? I'm afraid today most choices would be to be the king, right? But God reveals the truthfulness of it. Child Guidance 304 and 5. As the Israelites kept their children within their houses during the time when the judgments of God were in the land of Egypt, so in this time of peril we are to keep our children separate and distinct from the world. Now, before the TV, the internet, and the cell phone, that was much easier to do. So Satan found a way to bring the whole world into our house, so that even if we kept them at home, they can get corrupted. So this is a real battle we have today. We are to teach them that the commandments of God mean much more than we realize. Those who keep them will not imitate the practices of the transgressors of God's law. Yes?
Public school.
Yeah, public school. See, but we could avoid that. We could keep them at home, do homeschool, or send them to a Christian school. But when you get the internet in your house and you get all these things, what do? It's very, very hard to control. I did think about at one point, we didn't do it, I thought about moving where there was no internet. You know, there are places where you can go where there is no internet. Parents must regard God's Word with respect, obeying its teachings. To the parents in this day, as well as to the Israelites, God declares. And so that brings it right down to us, and then it quotes Deuteronomy 6:6-9. So that's one of the reasons chapters 4 through 8 are so valuable today, because they apply in a very definite way to today. Notwithstanding this plain instruction, some of God's people permit their children to attend the public schools where they mingle with those who are corrupt in morals. In these schools, their children can neither study the Bible nor learn its principles. So God called us away from sending our children to public school. Now there is, I have had a few parents tell me that their children were safer in public school than in an Adventist school. And there's only one reason why that could possibly be true. And that is that when you go to a public school, you know that you need to live differently from the rest of them. When you go to an Adventist school, you may think that it's okay to live like the other ones do. Dress like they do the things they do. And if you don't do those things, sometimes you can get a lot of ridicule from other students and even teachers. And so I think that was the reason why. Of course, they had an older child, not a young child that's first grade, second grade, or whatever. But they had an older child, and they had trained the child right, and so they felt that their child was safer there. But even then, there's no Bible classes at those other schools. So I guess we have to weigh it all, but I think generally this is the right thing to do. Book Education 187, after quoting Deuteronomy 6 and 7. In order to interest our children in the Bible, we ourselves must be interested in it. To awaken in them a love for its study, we must love it. So there's two things about demonstrating we love it. Number one, do they see us studying it, reading it, when it's not worship time? Or is it only worship time? If they see that we're reading it, and then when we talk to them about it, if we're enthusiastic about it, those two things will help to convince them. Our instruction to them will have only the weight of influence given it by our own example and spirit. Ministry of Healing 283. God gave to Israel instruction in all the principles essential to physical as well as to moral health, and it was concerning these principles no less than concerning those of the moral law that he commanded them. And then it quotes from Deuteronomy 6. So this text is actually reflecting back upon all of the laws that God gave to his people. So we are to train our children to live healthfully while they're young, get them to drinking the amount of water they need to drink, to get the rest that they need to get. I don't know, we struggle with this rest thing because both of our grandchildren are night owls. I don't know I don't know how in the world they got this. It's not from us. But, I mean, it might be in the genes. I don't know. But, you know, how to get them to cherish. And have you ever read the statement that sleep before, I think it says 10 o'clock, I think. Oh, midnight, that's right. 1 hour of sleep before midnight is worth 2 hours after midnight. Have you ever read that statement? So, you know, if you feel like you have a lot to do, the best thing is get up early and do it. But go to bed, you know, at a decent time, 9 or 10 o'clock. And then get up early and try to catch up. But it seems like so many people, they want to stay up till they get it done, even if they have to stay up late. But that's not efficient. So somehow there's a lot to teach our children or anybody that we are around. You know, it doesn't have to be our children. We can teach anybody how they should live. Had the Israelites obeyed the instruction they received and profited by their advantages, they would have been the world's object lesson of health and prosperity. Can you imagine a whole nation, nobody got sick? That's what God had in mind. Nobody got sick. Everybody was healthy. Everybody was smart. You know, when they took a test, they were at the top. Yeah, above average. If all the laws that God gave had been practiced, that would have happened. Now, to some degree, the Jews have inherited amazing capabilities. Have you noticed that? They are good at business. They almost always prosper. They're smart people, very intelligent people. That is still the result of the small amount of Bible truth that they practiced. And so God's plan is that Seventh-day Adventists would have the same benefit. That we would become very smart people, very healthy people, and this would encourage others to follow our example. If, as a people, they had lived according to God's plan, they would have been preserved from the diseases that afflicted other nations. Above any other people, they would have possessed physical strength and vigor of intellect. They would have been the mightiest nation on the earth. Nobody would have wanted to make war with them. They would have been the most powerful nation on the earth if they had done this. But somehow, they looked over at the people of the world and they said, we'd like to do that instead of what God told us to do. And so, they ended up missing a lot of what God had in mind. So what about us? You know, do we longingly look at what the world's doing and we want to pattern after that and not be different from the world? Well, if we do, we end up with the same loss that they had. But if we consider it a privilege to be different and to live like God said, then He can demonstrate much through us. After my sermon was finished, the man that runs a alternator shop just down the road from Wildwood, he came up to me and he said, that was a wonderful sermon. Gave me a big hug. You know, he's obviously a Christian, but he may not hear sermons like that too often either, even though he goes to church. Now we're going to look at this phrase where it says, talk of them when thou sittest, walkest, liest down, and risest up. What can we learn about that phrase? In 1 Testimonies 1:56, it says, "Parents, watch your children with a jealous care. Exhort, reprove, counsel them when you rise up and when you sit down, when you go out and when you come in. Line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little and there a little. Subdue your children when they are young." Now, if you get the drift of this statement, it's saying we need to keep an eye on what the children are doing. And where they need correction, we need to correct them, whether it's in the morning or in the afternoon or in the evening. We need to correct them. But of course, one of the things that children really don't like is to be preached to. So we have to be careful about that. But on the other hand, we need to try to help them see the value of the different way of living. Counsels on Sabbath School Work, page 45 and 6. The direction given by the Son of God to Moses for the instruction of the children of Israel is just as essential now as it was then. And it should be heeded as diligently by parents today as by God's ancient people. So, now maybe some of you work with children's department or have grandchildren. And of course we can't do as much if there are grandchildren, but there is still work that can be done. Religion must be woven into every part of the home life if we would see the results that God has designed as the fruit of following His way. Pride, self-esteem, and boldness are marked characteristics of the children of this day, and they are the curse of the age. What do you think is a good antidote for those problems? Getting involved in helping other people, yes.
Don't let your children hear you say they're better than the other children down the street.
Well, that's important too. We had a family at Wildwood, and they wanted to train their children to be unselfish and to think of others. So they started making some tasty foods, and they would go around and deliver them to a bunch of homes at Wildwood. And I don't know whether they did anything outside of Wildwood to non-Adventist places, but they were trying to train their children with becoming unselfish. They were homemade too. They took the time to make it, and then they went and gave it out. Yes.
I have an experience with my children when we were in Africa. We got this big bunch of bananas.
Mm-hmm.
When they were ripe, one day I came home, they were gone. I said, "Where did the bananas go?" The children said, "We gave them all away to the kids because they're hungry." Biscuits, like a big can of biscuits. They called all the kids in Sabbath school. "Hey guys, are you hungry?" Of course they were hungry. They're skinny kids. Give them biscuits that was like for a month for us. Mom, but you taught us to be kind and to be giving. Yes, indeed. So what can you say?
The mission field is a good place to raise children. Yeah. We weren't in the mission field of that kind, but when our children were young, we were pioneering, and it was in the U.S., but the conditions of living were more like in the mission field. And so I believe it was a blessing for them. Yes.
There's an article in the Time magazine that came today, the question of punishment punishing children for lying. I haven't read the whole article, but the general tone of it was that you have to be careful about that,
Mhm.
especially if the parents are lying.
Oh, yeah, definitely. But, you know, we need to do it right, but do it. When I see this unchristlike, unlovely manifestation on every side, and then see parents and teachers seeking to display the ability and proficiency of their children and scholars, I am pained to the heart. For I know that it is exactly the opposite course from the one that should be pursued. So she's talking about putting children up front, having them do things that makes everybody say, wow, you know, what a capable child you have, and it feeds their pride. So this is counsel to Sabbath school work. We need to be careful in the Sabbath school. Maybe we can talk more about that next time. But our time is up for tonight.